and I just want to move right on to introducing our first speaker for event for Starship Congress. Now, in each Starship Congress, we make a really big deal about who is our first speaker as an honorary title. So a first speaker is someone who sets the pace for the conference, someone who brings us together and focuses our attention on what the ethics of what we're trying to achieve today is. And I can think of no one better than scientist and beloved author David Brin to be our first speaker for Starship Congress. Please welcome David Brin, everybody. So you can use
this. Thank you, Andreas. And Mike back there and the rest of the organizers for inviting me. Oh, is this your phone? Andreas? Is this your phone? Oh. Yeah, it's terrific to be here. I was just at Science Foo camp at Google yesterday, and Pete Warden, head of the Breakthrough Initiative, sends his greetings. And there are a number of other people there who wanted to send their vibes to at least participate in spirit here. Because, of course, you are the proverbial tip of the iceberg of the millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions who share this dream. And sometimes it's just measured by what people aren't embarrassed to be known to be enthusiastic about. Things change. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, NASA had to end its SETI program because of the ill repute of wasting taxpayer money. Now, with the Breakthrough Initiative, there's a lot of money pouring into it, private money, and NASA's dipping its toe back in. We're graced with Ron Turner back there in the corner, who helped to reestablish NASA's Innovative and Advanced Concepts Group, which I participate in as a member of the External Council of Advisors. And that's what develops the is NASA's mini micro DARPA that grants little seed grants for ideas that are just this side of plausible. So far, no warp drives. Sorry, Miguel. But a fair number of unconventional inside the solar system concepts that have to pass vetting. And I'm proud to be involved in that. And some of the projects are really kind of fun, and I'll try to mention a couple of them along the way. But essentially, the notion that space is for everybody. I'd like to give some perspectives on near and far perspectives on the solar system. By way of background, my PhD in astrophysics is, as I joked with Miguel, low church. I did my PhD studying comets and asteroids, which is highly pertinent and relevant for our period of time. He's high church. He does the wonderful mathematics of, quantum gravity and all that sort of thing. And so Gregory Benford and I wrote a novel just before Halley's Comet arrived called Heart of the Comet. It turned out that my doctoral dissertation, which was the closest of any work to describing Halley's Comet and predicting the shape of its light curve, how it would behave. It came up with the theory that's now accepted on dust layers on the surfaces of comets and all of that sort of thing. It underestimated the size of Halley's Comet by a factor of 2. But the book, the novel, hit it spot on, because we decided to be daring and expand the size of Halley's Comet by a factor of 8 in its mass, which is a factor of 2 in length, in order for it to have enough surface gravity for characters to chase each other across the surface, shooting each other. So sometimes scientific accuracy comes through the back door. But let's see now, I have a clicker. Does this do it? No, that does it. All right, well, for some folks, it's almost forgotten dreams. You can see these garish and then super garish, the huge moon bases that was thought we would have in 2001. And when 2001 came along, I published a rant about how everybody was getting it wrong in discussing this, bemoaning how come we don't have these marvelous space stations in 2001. And physically we could have had them, but it would have required really substantial investment, distracted from other things, certainly distracted from the Vietnam War. And I pointed out that if you actually watch the movie and compare that world to today, the biggest difference is that that civilization was one of officious, patronizing, secretive, pushy and bossy white males. And that's what eventually drives Hal crazy, is their secrecy and pushiness. Whereas if we sent such a mission to Jupiter today, at least one, probably two of the astronauts would have been female, and they'd actually listen to poor Hal. Instead of making threats. So the thing is, we need to remember that perhaps the thing we've been working the hardest on is our society. And perhaps that is the hardest thing to do, and that's the thing we've been making more progress in than space. And perhaps we have not been sitting still. We've just been doing some things that were really essential in order to be the kinds of people who deserve to move out there. Now, do we deserve to move out there politically? All right. Now, this is a chart. Perhaps we could have the front lights dimmed. At least somebody could experiment with the lights. This is a chart that represents the number. Each of these swirls represents a space mission. So as you can see, we've had a whole lot at the moon, Mars, a very small number to the sun. They are now sun diving, but that group, I wasn't an advisor on the group that won that mission, so it's not officially a sun diver mission, and I'm ticked off. Some of the most exciting, of course, going out to Jupiter, to Saturn, and then, of course, Alan Stern's project, Near Horizons project that went to Pluto. And if you want, you can go to my YouTube channel and watch one of my rants I gave, one of my TED Talk rants, about how us boomers did a terrible thing for civilization with a wonderful movie called Network. And most of you know the phrase I'm about to cite to you, and that is, I want you to get up and go to the window, stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And self-righteous indignation appears to be killing the United States of America. It's a drug high. I gave a talk at the National Institutes on Drugs and Addiction actually about this, about how self-doped mental states can give you a heroin-like high. You all know it's true. How many of you have ever been indignant? How many of you are liars? Or too lazy to raise your hand? And now, how many of you would admit that it feels real good to know that you're right and everyone else is wrong? Well, in this, what does this have to do with space? In this rant, I finish by talking about how I had sat with my children and watched as an aeroshell spacecraft skirted through the wispy atmosphere of a planet with an accuracy greater than if you shot a bullet through a window in New York from here. Then popped off the aeroshell at the exact right millisecond, popped out a drogue chute, then popped out a parachute, and it used the parachute to target towards a postage stamp, and then popped off the parachute just in time to set off rockets that made it hover just right to lower by crane to the Martian surface a minivan-sized laboratory that is still there operating in our names. And I went to the window and embarrassed my children by screaming, "I'm as proud as hell and you won't stop me." So you see, notice how that tapped into a little bit of the indignation high. You can get the same high from being proud, from being joyous. I'm a member of a civilization that does shit like this. And across 6,000 years, all the pyramidal, feudal-style cultures, and there's always people who want to make us back into that pyramidal, feudal society. None of them, all of them never accomplished a tinieth percentile of what we've accomplished. And so we sent this spacecraft swooping out there where it's dark. And with a shutter speed of milliseconds, it took those wonderful pictures. And I'm telling you now that if you didn't get sexual level pleasure from that, who am I preaching to? I'm wasting my time. I'm just giving you lines that you should use on the others, your other citizens, fellow citizens, who are so steeped in their delusional reasons to think that we're a collapsing civilization when we can do stuff like this. When we can do stuff like this. All right, so this is an illustration from the terrific 3-minute video trailer that Patrick Farley made for my novel Existence. It's the best 3 minutes you'll have with your clothes on. And this is what, in Existence, et cetera, on 2050. And the rich are shooting themselves off in their own homemade suborbital rockets. It's just an extrapolation of what they already do. And so we're preparing for the next phase, public-private combos and barnstorming. Because the closest thing to this era that I think we're entering into is the barnstorming era with aircraft. The government stepped back, but the government was still absolutely essential. Government financed the first development of the technology and then gave contracts, mail delivery contracts, that the barnstormers then competed for. Well, this is the equivalent of Obama declaring, all right, the stuff we know how to do, government won't do that well. So we'll give contracts to SpaceX and other launch companies, and you guys do it. The stuff of lifting things to near-Earth orbit. But what this does is it unleashes a new barnstorming era. And so this next year, Virgin Galactic is going to start taking rich people up there. I can't think of any group that's more expendable. And there will be others like Jeff Bezos filling this niche. And of course, Elon wants to fill that niche for people who have considerably more money and would like to circumnavigate the moon or that sort of thing. There's a space port in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. If you go there as a tourist, the bus that carries you, you'll see my smiling face show up and give you the 20-minute introduction at the spaceport, and that's where Virgin Galactic might do its takeoff, and there you have the White Knight with the spaceship carried underneath, and of course, Paul Allen's new carrier made from 2 747s. It's a little larger. What happened there? It does not seem, yeah, okay. Now, you all know the Lagrangian points, and I'll be referring to this one here, especially lunar orbit. Lunar orbit is conceivably of huge importance, and I'll refer to those. Dang, this thing is, All right, well, one thing is we have a gentleman here who is on the B612 Foundation. Raise your hand so people can talk to you. Right there in the very back corner. Pardon? Yeah, Scott Manley, right. And I'm on the board of advisors for B612. I'm also on the external board for a couple of the asteroid resources companies, and this is where the techies all want to go. This is where the billionaires want to go to take doing what a billionaire ought to do, and that is once your first 2 or 3 billion are safe, and the next 2 or 3 billion are making good money for you, bet the rest on something that would be cool, that might make money, but mostly is going to move us forward. So B612 wants to find these things and shepherd them out of the way. Asteroidal resources, planetary resources, and others want to find them and mine them. And as my old friend John Lewis wrote in Mining the Sky in the 1980s, if you were to find the right one, just 1 kilometer across, and melt it down with solar mirrors, you would get the entire world's iron and steel production for a year, the entire world's gold and silver production for 10 years, and the entire world's platinum group elements for 1,000 years. We don't yet know how to do that, so what they want to do first is find a completely different kind of asteroid, a very moist kind, throw a baggie around it, and let the sunlight just, evaporate out the water, and the water is extremely valuable. Water in orbit, water off the Earth is extremely valuable. Now, the asteroids are a much better source than the lunar poles, but my advisor for my PhD, Jim Arnold, was the one who predicted the lunar ice, and I have no objection to using it. I just want to find out how much is there, because if it's below a certain threshold, we should consider it a precious resource and leave it for the loonies. I mean the lunatics, or whoever lives on the moon in the future. We should not rip off the lunar ice. So here are some of the groups. That's Phobos actually up there, which may be the most valuable among the most valuable real estate in the solar system. Why? It might be a carbonaceous chondrite with all sorts of volatiles and resources that we could use to make fuel and water and all that sort of thing, in orbit right above Mars. It even has the raw material needed that we might be able to make a space elevator. In any event, Phobos and Deimos down there, the little guy, these would be of extreme value, and I think that's one reason the Russians keep trying to land a medallion on Phobos, and they keep failing. In any event, there's John Lewis's old book, Mining the Sky. He has some recent ones, and this is really impressive that people like Planetary Resources are interested in using them, and B612 is interested in protecting us from them, because after all, the biggest reasons why there aren't velociraptors running around right now is because they did not have a space program. So, all right, so some of the things we might do with this material is perhaps solar power, beam power. I'm a little skeptical simply because we're doing so well in developing sustainable power down here on Earth. We're going to save this planet despite the obstruction of people who refuse to listen to science. And so I have a lot of friends who want to build these things. I think it's more likely we're going to use those resources to build things like this and then use the power to move around the solar system, because I'm hoping that the Earth will be self-sufficient. Oh, this is, clicker is something. Oh, well, how about that? All right. So if we were to mine the asteroids, this is the old dream. This is the equivalent of the singularity for us old farts. Back in the 1980s, the thing that had us transfixed was not so much AI or artificial intelligence or singularities, but the notion of getting out there, taking asteroids, mining them, and turning them into gigantic space habitats. Because, of course, over the long run, if you wound up making hundreds of these gigantic space habitats, the majority of the human race would have a lot of experience living and working in space. I mean, you could be the majority of citizens. We could turn the Earth into a park, giant university system. You go down there and just strengthen your legs and learn stuff. And then, of course, they would start orbiting farther and farther and farther out in the solar system, and eventually one of them would decide to just leave. And we would, at minimum, get interstellar colonization just by drifting. Just by drifting out there, or somebody getting sick and tired of hanging around all these people who paint in the wrong colors, or whatever meme problems they have in the future. And these could then be propelled and be self-sustaining across the generations to get to the stars. And generation ships are, of course, part of it. Part of our mix of concepts. Many of you are more ambitious than that, and you want to go personally. Greg Bear sort of lovingly, because he's one of us, the great science fiction author Greg Bear, nevertheless satirized a billionaire who was funding research in immortality and in space flight. And he said, the billionaire said, "I want to help beautiful, enthusiastic women bear children under distant suns." Well, who doesn't? At that point, we'll be swapping sexes back and forth, and I'm sure any of you ladies would love to help beautiful, enthusiastic women bear children under distant suns. Just take your turn being one of us hairy guys, or that's not even necessary. And I'm running a little bit far afield there. Okay, beanstalks. Look up my name and lift the earth. Oh no, I have a slide for that, never mind. Let's see now. All right, so are we worried about a baked world? Now, there you have what's called the Goldilocks zone, or the, oh, what the heck did I just turned it off? Oh, there we go, little tiny thing of light. We've all heard of the Goldilocks zone, the continuously habitable zone around a star. And 20 years ago, we knew of no planets outside our solar system. Now we know of thousands. I mean, you're a member of a civilization that does stuff like that. And is nobody out there saying, shame on you? All right, I want your permission to be slightly off color. All right? Every member of this civilization should have to have Kleenex in their underwear. I'm serious. From just the news that we get from time to time. My civilization did this. Eat this, Romans. So we've been finding some in Goldilocks zones, and what the Goldilocks zone is depends upon whether you just take the straight, T to the fourth notion of the sunlight's temperature balance. That gives you a wrong impression, because in order to have a living world, you have to have an atmosphere. The atmosphere changes the Goldilocks zone. It changes where the zone is. And as it turns out, the Earth skates just outside the inner boundary of our sun's Goldilocks zone. And this is one of the answers to the denialist cultists who say that how could humans ever affect a whole planet? Well, it turns out that our Earth's Gaia balance, in order to maintain liquid oceans, requires that we have a very transparent atmosphere to lose heat. We can afford just enough greenhouse gas to keep plants alive. It didn't used to be that way. The sun was cooler, and so the Goldilocks zone was a little bit farther out, but always we skated very close to the inner edge. The tragedy of Mars is not that it's way out there. The tragedy of Mars is that it's not the size of Venus. If it had been the size of Venus, or if they had swapped places, or if it had been the size of Earth, it would have had tectonics. It would have put enough greenhouse gas in the atmosphere that it would have reached a Gaia balance with oceans, but with a dense carbon dioxide atmosphere. If Mars had been large, we would have been able to go down there, splash and play and surf, but with having to wear respirators. So that's tragic. But the thing is, we skate along the very inner edge, and that means that we're non-Copernican. It means there's something strange and weird about us. As Goldilocks, as water worlds go, we're probably exceptionally dry, which brings up a possible answer to the Fermi paradox, and that is that most water worlds out there have less continental area than we do, which means that we were among those likely to develop hands and fire, which is the most optimistic of the 100 or so explanations for the Fermi. Who doesn't know what the Fermi paradox is? It's the notion of the question of why we've seen no signs of extraterrestrial life. And I'm deeply involved in this. I've been writing some of the main papers about this. I'm the guy who catalogs instead of leaping to say, I know the answer. But among my top 10 is the notion, the water world's explanation, that most water worlds out there are more water rich and have less continent. And therefore, we'll build starships, but without any competition, because all the intelligent life forms out there are dolphins and whales and octopi and things like that. So we'll have our cake and eat it too. We'll have others to talk to, but they won't be a threat. We'll be the starship captains. We'll be the police. We'll be the postmen. Don't get me started on Kevin Costner. Okay, but the problem is that boundary is moving. And we don't get the 5 billion years that Woody Allen promised us. What we get is about 100 million years. In about 100 million years, this boundary is going to pass the Earth as the sun gets hotter. And it'll be gradual, but the deserts that spread will not be caused by us. It'll be caused by natural phenomenon of the sun getting hotter. So, what can we do then? Well, I'm not going to go into any great detail, but if you Google my name and lift the Earth, you can find a YouTube rant and an accompanying more substantial blog in which I describe how we could lift the Earth and get it out, get it farther away from the sun. It would take about 100 million years. We'd have to have a very long-lived civilization and all of that, but it can be done. And not by the stupid method you've heard of flying a whole bunch of comets and asteroids past the Earth. That's a dumb method. Excuse me, I'm not going to vote for that one. Although I use it on Venus in one of my short stories. It was in some of the best of the years this last year, called The Tumble Downs of Cleopatra Abyss, in which millions of comets are targeted at Venus in order to give it the right atmosphere and give it oceans. That's in my short story collection, Insistence of Vision. Okay, well, what is this? This is blue Mars. This is what they estimate there might be enough on Mars, enough water on Mars to make some oceans. That's the Valles Marineris, the Great Canyon, filled with water. And of course, this is all portrayed in Kim Stanley Robinson's great series, Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars. But these are not the only possibilities. It turns out that there may be as many as 12 water worlds right now in our solar system. As many as 12. We know about Europa. We know from all sorts of evidence that there's liquid water underneath an ice roof. The one that's blatant and has water volcanoes is Enceladus. Those two are absolutely confirmed. But the evidence is almost overwhelming that Ganymede has something, Callisto has something, although it may be slushes working its way through cracks, because Callisto's far enough from Jupiter that the tides aren't very strong. In from Europa is Io, there the tides were so strong that the water left long ago. And Io's volcanoes are sulfur. So if you watch the movie 2010. By the way, it's Arthur C. Clarke's centennial this December, and we're going to have all sorts of celebrations at the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination at UCSD in San Diego. If you live anywhere in the area, sign up for the mailing list. There's all sorts of great events. But if not, then find some way to convince your local club or something like that to hold events in December to honor Arthur Clarke. In any event, Titan. Can you imagine this? We may land, NIAC has got had funded studies of a submarine that could land in the methane oceans, seas of Titan, to go around studying the wax formations and the ethylene rivers and the possibility of wax creatures, which I've written about in a story or two. But below that surface of ultra-cold, waxy methane oceans is ice, which is a rock for them, and underneath that, molten magma, molten ice, molten water, water that's melted. It's so hot, it's melted, and it comes out in their volcanoes. You might have two realms of life in one world. And of course, Pluto, they've now determined that it seems likely from dynamic effects, from orbital effects, that Pluto might have water ice underneath. I need to move along a little quicker. So yeah, possibly Ceres, which means that you don't even need the tug of a nearby planet to have molten water underneath. There's some things like the mineral transformation that might be providing enough heat. And then there's getting out there. So, how do we get out there? Well, one thing we need to do is augment ourselves. It won't be exactly us who go out there. Either it'll be AIs or it'll be our children somewhat modified. And the first augmentation we'll have is, of course, augmentations to our ability to see and think. This is another scene from that 3-minute video trailer to my novel Existence. So that's a street scene in San Diego, and you can see that people are very used to augmented reality. But what are these things from her stalks from her head? I guess I'll have to save that for another day. So will we meddle with the recipe of life? Will we alter who we are? Well, in some of my talks, I talk about some of the ways in which we can alter humanity. Remedial interventions are the most important. There are still children on this planet who do not achieve their potential because they did not have adequate nutrition or education or access to infrastructure. And that is ridiculous. It's just a stupid waste of talent. It's just completely wasteful, and there's no reason to call that goody two-shoes. That is simply pragmatic. There are other possible ways, games that teach mental skills. A fellow in the back corner invented a Kerbal space program that taught a lot. Pharmacological, nootropics that might make us smarter, prosthetics, cyber neuro links, biological computing. Even inside our cells, it turns out that computing takes place. It's not just based on synapses. Artificial intelligence, now you're talking 5 hours worth of discussion. Just to talk even a little bit about it. Lifespan extension. Some of you are involved in that. And I get to be the grouch at some of these gatherings because we've plucked all the low-hanging fruit. We are the Methuselahs of mammals. And then altering humanity. Oh, that's the name of one of my short story collections and another wonderful Patrick Farley cover. And we seek otherness. We want to get out there. We want to find out what's out there. We're descended from gregarious apes. No mountain should stand in the way. And the mountain of space is a big one. And then there's the question of Fermi's silent cosmos, the question of where is everybody? And I write a lot about this. There are some people who feel that if we discovered life out there, it would lessen our chances. Why? Because clearly some filter is reducing the number of alien species, of intelligent species in the cosmos. We don't know what that filter is, but the Drake equation, clearly some factor is being suppressed. We know it's not the number of planets. That factor has been turned into 1 in the last 20 years. We now know planets are everywhere. So that's not it. Every year we find out that life seems more likely, not less. Now, it still could be that life requires some miraculous, fluky step. We don't know this yet. Personally, I lean a little more towards intelligence being a little fluky. I think there's every reason to believe we are anomalously smart. God help us. What was it Eric Idle sang? Better hope that there's... I need to get in tune here. We better hope that there's intelligent life somewhere out in space because there's bugger all down here on Earth. From Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. But these guys say that if we do discover life out there, then it means the great filter is in front of us. That something kills advanced civilizations to explain why the stars seem to be empty. So it's a great ball of wax, and it's going to be more and more pertinent to us as we build our starships, or as we start to send out starships. And I'm involved in the arguments over METI, messaging to extraterrestrial intelligence. You've all heard of SETI. If you go to my website, /METI, you can read. I'm the bulldog of the scientists who have resigned from all the SETI commissions in protest because these people want to beam these messages without proper vetting and discussion first. And it's the zealotry and failure to engage in peer review in a possibly risky enterprise that has us upset. Not that we expect alien invaders tomorrow, but that you do things in the right way. You don't bet everyone else's children on your assertions and assumptions. And so if you want to find out more about this, you're welcome to. I know some of you were involved with the SETI Institute in some way and all that. I approve of the SETI Institute. I just don't approve of this notion that anybody has the right to yell, yoo-hoo, on our behalf without exposing their concepts to critical review. And there's your Drake equation. And F sub p is the one that we have now know is virtually 1. Because we know that the fraction of stars that have planets is on the order of 1. But the question is, what fraction survive? What fraction make civilizations? What fraction gain intelligence? And I'm betting more on those. All right, so we talked a little bit about the Goldilocks zone. I don't know why I had this slide here, because I already talked about it. There's what's called the SETI League, their Project Argus, in which they were trying to get 5,000 amateurs to put old satellite dishes in their backyard. And in the SETI League era, this is all the stuff you needed in order to participate in a network to create all-sky awareness. Now you could just make a little box. And so I'm trying to help people to revive Project Argus. Only one of these stations is still open. It's still in business. But if we could talk some millionaire to spend just $1 million on this project, I think the result would be a little box that thousands of people around the world could buy for $200. Simply attach one lead to an old satellite dish, attach the other lead to the internet, and we would have 5,000 backyard dishes sweeping the sky looking for transient phenomena. because that's not what SETI does. SETI looks from one star to another with a soda straw. And all sky awareness would be tremendously helpful, and amateurs would be good at that. And we need situational awareness if we're going to build starships. Now, here's one of the last items. You are among the first people on this planet to learn about this. The Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination, we have a new project called TASAT. Now, I do a lot of consulting with government agencies, CIA, groups like that, who are very concerned. They want hard science fiction authors to talk to them about potential threats. So they give their presentation about what they're worried about, and then we say, oh, you're thinking way too small. And they love it, which is a good sign, isn't it? I mean, isn't that a good sign about the mental state of our protector caste? And very often I say, you know, all right, you've created this scenario. I remember vaguely there was a story about this. And what we have to fear most is that if we ever encounter aliens or ever have some kind of a weird thing happen, I don't know, the underminer comes out from below the ground, dinosaurs come loose, like, you know, every 17 years, the what are they called? Yeah, in Washington, D.C., these, well, you know, maybe they didn't actually die. Maybe they're the 65 million year dinosaurs. And they come out like those guys come out every 17. Well, something weird happens. I'm sorry, I get punchy and I get carried away. Something weird happens, and they form a commission. And the commission gives advice. Well, very often, science fiction stories have said, okay, here's what would happen. The obvious notion, but it's not what I'm going with this story. How might the obvious conclusion be wrong? So I talked about this, saying, wouldn't it be nice if we had a community out there that could, anybody, a government agency or anybody, could publish a challenge saying, does anybody know any stories about this? And of course, it's hypothetical. It's purely hypothetical. What if we had first contact with this kind of thing? But to have people go out there onto the database and say, well, there's this story that was an analog, 1965. There was this story and this novel. And so you have this great background of stories about the atom or about AI and robots or about bioplagues or about life in space. And what a shame if this great heritage of thought experiments isn't available if we ever need it. And so science fictional situations confronted by agencies, corporations, were foretold in stories and films. So that's why at the Arthur C. Clarke Center, we've created TASAT. And it's just gone online last week. And it would be great if you would join the community, visit the site, offer suggestions for improving the site and the interface, but also just sign up to receive the alerts. You're not going to get very many at first, but to receive the alerts, and the alerts will be, hey, what if this? Does anybody know a story? So this is not your standard science fictional discussion group. We're not saying, what if this, go ahead and blah, blah, blah. It specifically is, what if something like this, can you cite a story? And what was the unusual take of that story about this particular thing? So it would be great if you'd spread the word about this. And of course, we're all here to discuss Starship variations. I discussed earlier the world ship, and you'll hear from our special guest about this, shall we say, the least implausible warp drive, and many other possibilities. In my novel, Existence, it goes with the notion of the solar-propelled pellets, but it takes it to its logical conclusion. What if the galaxy was filled with them? What if we discover that the solar system is filled with these pellets, and the situation is not all howdy? Where? So, beam-driven. Oh, yes. Have to mention Robert Forward. If there's ever an interstellar Congress that does not mention Robert Forward, there's some kind of curse that falls on it. So you guys got to at least mention his name by moving forward, at least once per event. And this is another Patrick Farley scene where the astronaut has picked up one of these solar laser-propelled pellets, and it's a little larger than they're talking about with Project Breakthrough. There seems to be some kind of a hand reaching out to touch his hand from the inside. So, we're nearing the end. One of the things that I recommend that you look up on my YouTube channel is my rant at the Singularity Conference years ago about theology. You are the smart guys. You should be able to talk to religious people. They make up a large part of the voting population in this country, and they are turning against science. And we need to make clear to them that this is not a zero-sum game, that they should be proud of this civilization as well, because he would be. And now, why would I take the Tower of Babel as a sign of him being proud of us? Because if you actually read the Tower of Babel story, God is not angry. This is a guy who could throw tantrums in those days. A page earlier in the same book, he drowns everybody on the planet. A page later, he pours fire and brimstone on a city. Here he says, if they continue thus, nothing will be beyond them. Therefore, let's scatter them. Have them gain a lot of experience, diversity, pain, learn a lot. Become diverse. They're not ready for this. But it might be not ready yet. Because the fundamental notion in that very short story is nothing will be beyond them. And I know of no theologian who ever actually parsed out what that means. It means we are made so that nothing is beyond us. And maybe it was just not then, because we're rebuilding that tower. How many of you are afraid of language stopping your projects? We're rebuilding it, and if he scatters us again, fine, but the fact of the matter is we're going to keep building till the very last second. And making our neighbors proud of this is the most important thing we can do politically. To make them proud to be a member of this incredible civilization, scientific civilization, because nothing else will stop them from participating in a trumped-up war on science. And I said that with a lowercase t. All right, so remake ourselves on some frontier is what we did. And we're choosing between destinies. And the only choice is between foul destinies and a destiny in which we create our own diversity, even if we don't meet aliens. So it all leads to the question, will we be the first? Will we be the ones to light up the galaxy? To bring mail to all the dolphins out there trapped on water worlds, or to the gloomy gusses out there who have given up. That might be an explanation for the Fermi paradox, and it might be our destiny. The galaxy may be waiting for us to stir things up. And I can't think of a better job, especially for Californians. And with that, I thank you. I think that took 55 minutes, something like that. Oh, did we have time for questions? Anybody? It was a little bit of a bounce around there. Yeah.
We're not detecting other civilizations, but maybe we're just looking in the wrong place. I mean, radio waves, that assumes inefficient communication system. How long is that going to last?
Also, it's not just that we're now expanding SETI with incredible optical detectors. So if somebody is beaming a light sail between stars and they accidentally just sweep us, these transient detectors will detect. And that's why I've been pushing for all sky transient awareness. But the fact of the matter is that there are some limiting cases for the Fermi paradox. And one is that the Earth was prime real estate for 2 billion years with an oxygen atmosphere and only single-celled organisms. And there's no sign whatsoever that we were colonized during any of that time. And all it would have taken is a flush toilet to change life on Earth. We would have seen it in the, and I have a story about that. So the Fermi paradox is truly odd. There is something truly odd. Any such, we haven't looked enough in this way or we haven't looked enough in that way, any such hypothesis depends upon the notion that nobody ever went out there and did a whole lot of colonization. Well, there might have been one who did, and they love to colonize comets. So any one wave of colonization might have just missed us. Or at the opposite extreme, we may live in a zoo or a nursery world that's being protected. In which case, Miguel is right. Because the only way you could have prevented the Earth from being meddled with across all that time is if you have law. If you have a truly fierce law and law enforcement to prevent the kinds of visits or colonizations that would have messed up our evolution. If that's their value system, then you need warp drive in order to have an empire that could enforce such law. So you see what I'm saying? There's lots of parameters here, and if you're really going to understand all this panoply out there, you got to read more science fiction. So, and I can recommend some. Yes, sir. Speak up for everybody.
Yeah. How are you proposing to move the Earth into the
He wants another hour. How would you move the Earth? I'll give you a clue. It has to do with the fact that we have a moon. And space tethers, beanstalks, those sorts of things. But I think you'll find my YouTube rant about let's move the Earth, I think you'll find it entertaining. So I'm hoping you will. Yes, sir.
Could you say a little bit more about self-replicating robots? I'm a believer that we eventually are going to create self-replicating spaceships.
Oh, yes. No, the notion that of the von Neumann self-replicating probe, I attended the first interstellar conference of any kind back in 1985, Interstellar Migration Conference, and the calculations were made that if we could make colony ships that could go just 10% of the speed of light, go to a nearby star system, have a lot of babies, 5 generations, build more starships, move on. It would just take 60 million years to fill the galaxy with humans. And we'd meet each other at the other side and hopefully have records and say, hi, cousin. If you send self-replicating probes that go to a nearby star, and there you don't need a place to colonize. They just mine the right asteroids, make 20 copies of themselves, fill them with mined fuel, and send those 20 on to more star systems. And those send 20 on and all of that. And let's assume they don't eat everything, but they stick to 20. At that rate, you fill the galaxy in 3 million years. That's an eye blink. So we aren't completely done with eliminating the possibility that the solar system has such beings. All we know is that they aren't listening to us and saying, okay, your radio and your TV are great. You know, this is welcome to the Galactic Federation. You've landed on your moon. We know that that's not true. So in my novel Existence, I portray them having, the asteroid belt having lots of remnants of these things, but they had a war. Because it turns out there's dozens of possible motives they might have, among which would be to mine a carbonaceous asteroid for water and carbonaceous materials, amino acids, and make copies of the beings who sent them and send those colonists down to Earth. And in my novel, they were prevented from doing that. And that's why we're here. So all that's left in the asteroid belt for my characters to find is remnants. But that creates a dramatic situation. But what I'm saying is there are so many ponderables about this, but we don't know yet enough about the asteroid belt. So that's where the riches are, that's where the dangers are, and that's where the possibilities are. And that's why most of the smart people want to go get out there to asteroids. There are Americans who want to go back to the moon. I think that's extremely silly in the short term. There may be ice at the lunar poles, but there's no fractionated resources like there are in the asteroids. And it's actually turned into a political football. One party wants to go back to the moon, one party wants asteroids. It happens that all the smart billionaires want asteroids, and all the scientists want asteroids. But the Russians want to go back to the moon, the Russians want to put footprints on the moon, the Chinese want to put footprints on the moon, the Indians, the Europeans, lots of billionaires. I say we build a lunar station and sell them services. Get rich selling them services. And then the lunar station can also be like Obama wanted, the place where we bring asteroidal resources, because people won't want us to bring them straight to the Earth. People are silly that way. Any other questions? Yes.
I've pretty much lived and dreamed science fiction since early 1950s. And you mentioned many, many science fiction authors, and you're writing the stories and stuff. How do you deal with radiation exposure in space?
How do I deal with radiation exposure in space in my stories? Well, sometimes, if I really want to move along, I invoke some kind of magic thing, but shields up. But of course, it's much more interesting to deal with radiation exposure and go to the NIAC site, NIAC, NASA NIAC, and NIAC always has a grant or two dealing with radiation protection or dealing with radiation exposure. I believe, for instance, it's going to be a matter of spaceship design. You keep all the fuel and all the water in an outer skin, and that provides you with some shielding. There's also electrodynamic shielding possibilities, but I guess this is not the time and place to get into it. I think that they really want to move the conference along. We'll take one more.
Okay, so in the books that you had in, you're given lists chariots of the gods.
Yes, of course I read Chariots of the Gods. If you had read any of my earlier novels, The Uplift Universe, you'd know that I riffed off of the notion of Chariots of the Gods in my Uplift Universe, because in that universe, we alter and make partners in our civilization, dolphins, chimpanzees, other animals, the way the Von Dänikenites claim that we were uplifted by aliens. I leave it up to the reader whether or not they believe it, because all the aliens we meet out there have been doing this for a long time. That's how everybody got their intelligence. And so they insist that it's complete mythology that we might have evolved our intelligence on our own. But all the evidence suggests that we did. And so we're called wolflings.
Well, the other thing I was going to say was that, I mean, it's kind of like arrogant to think that we are the most advanced civilization up to now, like the Mayans, or even back then, like we can't even replicate the pyramids right now.
Of course we can. Trivially. It was human beings who chipped rock and moved it. I see no reason to doubt that our ancestors, who were very clever people, they got it in their heads that by appealing to the gods, by moving rocks, that those gods would then help them through the horrible pain of their primitive existence. And I believe our ancestors were smart enough and dynamic enough and eager enough to be able to chip stone and move it. I've been to Easter Island, and it is utterly plausible. They didn't even have to have rollers underneath the things. They now know that all they had to do is walk these statues. That's Easter Island. So the pyramids are trivial. If we had to build the pyramids, it would take us a little while to gear up and design, but if we had to, we could build one in a year. Trivially. Yeah.
I've been interested in engaging with theologians and religious conversations for the same reason that space is a place for everybody. And scientists and religious groups tend to see other ways. Do you have some recommendations on how to approach the conversation?
Well, as I said, you're the smart guys. You should be able to read at least Genesis. I mean, it's a touchstone, it's a keystone of our culture, and you should understand it. I have found that when I argue about Genesis with fundamentalist Christians, I do not evoke hostility. I may budge them, I may not budge them, but they always wind up far more friendly to me rather than less friendly to me, because I bothered to talk to them in terms that they decided to spend their intellectual energies on. And so one of the things, in addition to the Tower of Babel, pointing out that nothing is supposed to be beyond us, well, in time, but also what's the purest moment in the Bible of the relationship between God and his creation? It's when God asked Adam to name all the beasts. Every single other moment in the Bible is about sin or redemption or curing the problems of sin and redemption. Only that moment is pure and collegial and curious. And it's about the creation being asked to use naming power, which one page earlier made the universe. So is it any accident that we're good at it? Going forth and naming new satellites and new objects in space and new species under a microscope? We're good at it. And so the implication that you can say to these people is, we're meant to be co-creators. We're not meant to just strum harps and tell some narcissist how great he is. And I did not mean that as a political statement. The point is that there are ways of connecting with our neighbors, and we're not doing it. And we need to do it, because if things go the way they keep going, then renunciationism is going to spread as a belief system. It's already spreading, and that is to renounce science, and that is to renounce progress, and to move back from progress. And if that happens, guys like you will be among the first burned at the stake. Because it looked just like Giordano Bruno. And that's not a threat. That is praise. That is love. I am telling you right now that the highest praise I can give any of you is that I am looking at a whole lot of really burnable people. You are among the first who will be thrown up onto the wood and burned alive. And I am saying that not as a threat, but as love. Because I'll go first.